Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're just going to give it a little bit of time and let people hop on, and then we'll begin. All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to our Mended Hearts webinar today. This advocacy webinar is going to focus on an important piece of legislation called the Mini Act. I'm Mandy Sandcooler. I'm your Director of Partnerships and Communications here at Mended Hearts. And just wanted to give you a few reminders. All attendees are in listen-only mode. We will not be able to answer any questions if they come up about your specific health condition, but do encourage you to take that back to your clinician afterwards. Please type any questions you have into the Q&A box so that we can answer them at the end of the presentation. And we are recording the webinar, and it will be available on our website and YouTube channel tomorrow. And we did just want to thank all of our Action Network partners. With their support, we are able to bring programming like this. So thank you to those partners who are on the screen today. And I'm going to let Chris take it from here. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Mandy, and hi, everybody. Really excited to be joining this webinar with you guys today to talk about the Mini Act. We have a few great panelists for you today. I'm going to start off by giving you all just a really quick overview of what the Mini Act is and what it does before we turn it over to our guest speakers here. But just for anybody who doesn't know me or hasn't been on one of our webinars before, my name is Chris Baxter. I'm a senior manager at Trauma Strategies here in Washington, D.C. Have been working with the Mended Hearts organization for probably close to a year and a half, 2 years now, on all of our advocacy efforts. So, like I said, really excited to be doing this webinar focused specifically on the Mini Act. Next slide, please, Mandy. I'm going to go through these next couple slides pretty quickly just to make sure we have enough time for our speakers and Q&A after. So most importantly, what is the Mini Act? The Mini Act stands for the Maintaining Investments in New Innovation Act. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation designed to support medical innovation in the U.S. And what it specifically does is it extends the time for GTTs, or what are genetically targeted therapies, to remain on the market before facing price negotiations under the Inflation Reduction Act. This was a bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, that was a bill passed in 2022 under a Democrat-controlled Congress. It did a number of things, but what it did most importantly was under CMS, it created this new program for Medicare to negotiate drug prices for their enrollees. Like any large piece of legislation, it had some flaws and some tweaks that needed to be made. For our purposes, for the Mini Act, what it did is it categorized GTTs under a much shorter timeline than what it did for some other types of drugs and therapies like biologics, for example. So what the Mini Act is intended to do is increase that market exclusivity period from 7 years up to 11 years to match some of those other drugs. So the goal, this is to incentivize investment in these breakthrough treatments, especially for cardiovascular diseases and rare conditions, and to correct those parts of the IRA that treat GTTs as simpler medications. Next slide, Andy. So why is this important for Mended Hearts and heart patients? Well, as we all know, cardiovascular disease continues to be a leading cause of death and disability. GTTs are extremely important for us because they're often used to treat heart diseases. They're used for management. And for the companies that produce these drugs, they require an extremely long and costly research process, and then a long and lengthy approval process for FDA, even after all that research and development is done. So obviously for our patients, innovation in these areas to expand treatment options really can improve the quality of life for cardiovascular patients and can reduce hospital visits for heart patients as well. So the Mini Act removes these disincentives for developing GTTs, allowing more time for the companies to recoup those research and investment costs. And most importantly, this ensures that the heart patients have access to the latest and most effective therapies. So just a little bit more specific on what a GTT actually is. Genetically targeted technologies, therapies use very advanced science to deliver precision medicine, helping heart patients better manage their conditions. These are much simpler than other types of therapies that cardiovascular patients sometimes receive, and they can really improve outcomes with complex conditions. I think one of the best things that GTTs do are they really reduce your treatments to once, sometimes twice per year, improving that adherence. And that can be a really critical factor for disease management, especially in folks in rural areas who then don't have to go, once, twice, 3 times a month to a healthcare facility to receive their treatment. So what can we do to help promote the Mini Act? As I noted before, we have a couple of really great speakers on the line. Reps Don Davis and John Joyce, bipartisan, have led the effort in the House, and we're expecting Marsha Blackburn to potentially take this up in the Senate. Although we're not quite there yet. She joined the bill in the last Congress when it was led by Senator Bob Menendez, who's no longer in Congress. So we're hoping Senator Blackburn takes up the reins and can lead that effort there. So, what we're asking of our advocates, contact your senator's office, urge them to co-sponsor or sponsor the act to help protect innovative heart therapies. And by supporting the Mini Act, we can help ensure continued progress and better futures for our heart patients. So I know that was a really quick overview. I hope that was helpful. And to start off, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Miller. Jonathan is a legislative assistant for Congressman Don Davis with North Carolina's 1st District. He helps the congressman on all of his healthcare, defense, veterans affairs issues, and he's previously worked for other members like Kurt Schrader from Oregon. So, Jonathan, if I'm missing anything from your bio that you want to throw in there, please do. Otherwise, I will turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Chris, and thanks for everyone for joining the webinar to talk about, one of the most important pieces of legislation pending right now, and especially both in the chronic and rare disease space, because obviously, this bill like this would impact not only the 40% of Americans living with a chronic condition, but the additional 10% of Americans who are living with a rare disease, because that's something that the Congressman Davis, representing district in rural North Carolina, has always been a priority when you serve in the state legislature. Always took meetings with rare disease patients, and that's really, especially in that space, a big reason why he's supported this bill to ensure that there's equal access to a lot of those rare disease treatments, many of which are developed with genetically targeted technologies, which is what this bill is all about. And obviously, we know that having any one particular rare disease is uncommon, but having a rare disease in general is not, given that it's 10% of the population. So that's something that we've always kept in mind, and a big motivator for why the Congress wanted to go ahead and get this bill introduced in the 119th Congress. 118th Congress, the bill was previously led by Congressman Nickel, also of North Carolina. He had represented areas of the Research Triangle, which obviously, been played critical roles, over the last 20, 25 years in developing next generation therapies for all kinds of rare and chronic conditions. In our district, North Carolina's 1st congressional district, which is kind of the northeastern quadrant of the state, we don't have any direct Research Triangle equities, but we do have a significant manufacturing base in the district, medical devices, things like syringes, personal protective equipment, and also pharmaceutical manufacturing based in the district. So it's very much high priority for us. And we've had patient advocates come from the district, those who are suffering with rare chronic conditions, and talk about the value of some of these emerging treatments and why at the end of the day you just need a level playing field. You want to have you don't want to have the government picking winners and losers. We like this type of treatment, we don't like that. So it's really about creating parity with this bill. And the great thing about the mini act, especially relative to some of the broader IRA bills that are out there that have a higher cost, and we're supportive of those broader IRA reform bills. But what's especially good about the mini act is that it has much lower cost, given that it's only applying to this one subset of medications, similar to the Orphan Cures Act, which I'm sure Matt will mention with Congressman, Dr. Joyce's team. That's something that we've been supportive as well, that got signed into law. And it's that type of bill that's really narrowly tailored, targeted for these specific treatments to make sure that they continue to be online, that there's at the very least no disincentive for innovators to start considering these treatments. And for those who are concerned about the influence of talk about big pharma and whatnot, what we're really talking about is in this space with respect to GTTs is most of the biotechnology companies that are researching, developing, moving forward these therapies are really mid-sized biotech companies. You're really talking about those emerging companies like Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, for instance, Ionis Pharmaceuticals, a whole suite of companies in that space who are just at the on the cutting edge of these treatments, and just honestly barely profitable at all. They're really doing it because they care about getting involved in the rare disease space and working with patient advocates who really just desperately need any hope of even getting access to this treatment. So that is just the way the system works. You need those market incentives for venture capital investors to get involved, and they're not going to take the leap of faith and actually take that initial, get over that initial hurdle, which is often the most challenging of investing in some of these cures, if there's an artificial government disincentive against investing in these therapies. So that's really a big reason, another big reason aside from the relatively low cost of the bill, why this is so important. So at this point, with Congressman Davis as the sponsor, Congressman Joyce, Dr. Joyce is the co-lead. We're now up to a total of, by Friday, we're going to have 23 bipartisan co-sponsors. We're currently at 22, but Congresswoman Takis has just signed on. So by Friday, we will have 23 bipartisan co-sponsors, which we're very excited about. And it's really just got the full spectrum of support from, again, those whether it's industry, patient advocate groups, constituents just calling their member of Congress once they hear about the bill and the benefits that it can have for treating cardiovascular and a whole host of other rare and chronic diseases. So it's certainly for all those reasons very, very helpful that we can move it down the field and get something done and actually have it be a realistic chance, whatever way that is, whether it's through an upcoming bipartisan health package, finding a vehicle to get it through, or is a standalone because there's so much consensus support, and because historically, for instance, in the 118th Congress, there was that bicameral bipartisan support as well. So hoping to continue that, as Chris mentioned, potentially with Senator Blackburn, and we just want to get as many people on board as possible. And I think one of the reasons that the mini act has a better chance in the 119th Congress in this environment is we're further out from the Inflation Reduction Act, and so those who have had concerns, those who said, well, we don't really want to touch it because it's got all this the landmark Medicare price negotiation framework in there that's historic and never been in there before. That resistance to making any changes whatsoever to the IRA has softened as you get, for no other reason, just as you get further out from the passage of the IRA and the recognition that anything as sweeping as the IRA is going to need some tweaks here and there, some reform. So certainly, with that, I think that's another reason to be optimistic about the chances of the Mini Act advancing forward. And that's really the background of why Congressman Davis got involved when he was in the state legislature. North Carolina was on the healthcare committee for his entire tenure there. So that's just a bit of background about why he got involved, what we're hoping to do with the bill, and the impact we hope it will have. So I'll turn it back over. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I really appreciate that insight. You brought up a lot of really good points there. The impact to North Carolina, the impact to mid-sized businesses who would otherwise not be making these investments due to these artificial barriers. So appreciate that perspective, and I'm sure we'll have some questions on that a little bit later. But no, I want to turn it over to Matthew Tucker now. With Congressman John Joyce's office, Dr. Joyce's office. Matt is Dr. Joyce's Deputy Chief of Staff and handles his health portfolio and is the Legislative Director. So, Matt, please add to your bio however you'd like, but I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on here, and thanks, Jonathan. And really excited to be here to kind of talk about some of the good work that does occur in Congress on a bipartisan basis. Not necessarily the first 10 or 20 or 100 items you might hear on cable news in the evenings, but we are here and we are committed to working on a whole host of issues. And it's kind of funny where healthcare often is one of the most acrimonious and just horrible political things, but also is where probably the most bipartisan work just by volume occurs in Congress. And we're very excited to be leading the Mini Act with Representative Davis, and that North Carolina connection of where we had previously worked with Davis and with Rep. Nickel, who's now departed, has been really good because there are a lot of similarities, I think, between the two states of North Carolina and Pennsylvania, where we kind of sit in the middle of the state in PA. We kind of hug two really big areas of biotech and biopharma innovation on both kind of the Philadelphia mainline area and then also out in Pittsburgh with the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, and so many other great research institutions out west. There's just an incredible amount of stuff happening in the space. And, we think it's incumbent on us as legislators in Washington to make sure we have the right mix of policies in place to ensure that the United States still remains the absolute unquestioned global leader in this space. So, I think back, I think both Jonathan and I predate our boss's tenures on the Hill in terms of government service. So we've seen a couple other things. And, I think back kind of to the passage of 21st Century Cures originally, when we actually signed in and actually defined GTTs as one of, and actually gave it a legal definition. And, as something as a Congress, we wanted to prioritize in a broadly bipartisan way as, a next iteration of innovation. And, we had a front row seat on the ENC minority side as the IRA went into effect and was passed through the committee. And there were bits and pieces of it that even we would say we agreed with, and bits and pieces of it that were like, we can make some small modifications here. There's some tweaks. We don't have to necessarily throw the entire thing out, but there are ways we can work this and make it better. And one of those was the original orphan exclusion, which Jonathan alluded to. We were able to get orphan cures through earlier this year, which would now open up that exclusion to provide negotiation coverage for folks. If you do have a rare indicated for multiple rare indications product, to encourage both secondary approval research and to also, on the flip side, encourage companies who might not want to launch in the United States and risk that negotiation on a smaller indication and wait for a bigger one so that, we're not depriving patients of the latest innovation on the market on that front. And, everything that I've been able to see so far in terms of how investors in the market has reacted to that going into effect has been a good thing. It is, just by the definition and patient size of orphan conditions, it is very difficult in this day and age to get investors interested, to go through, the life cycle of a molecule or the life cycle of a, infusion type drug where you are focusing on a rare population. The clinical trial landscape and dealing with the FDA and everything like that. There are so many moments where you can fail, and opening that up to advantage kind of rare disease treatments and drive more capital in that direction is such an important thing. And it is really, it is, there are so many diseases of the, 10,000 recognized rare diseases that we have plus in the United States today, where there is not a single FDA approved treatment or therapy. And, it is just brutal meetings when you're meeting with patient advocacy groups, where there just are clear unmet needs, and GTTs fit into that as well. And that's kind of one of the other areas we honed in on in the IRA of, okay, we're going to set up this kind of two-track process for biologics versus small molecules, but not all small molecules are created equal, and there are a lot of complexities that are associated with GTTs that separate them from what a traditional small molecule treatment is, both just in the complexity and the research that needs to go into it, and then both like on the flip side of what this actually means for patients, patient outcomes, and patient way of life when they're being treated for complex disorders. So we're thrilled to have willing partners in the Democratic side. I think we'll be the first Republican office to go on record and say, back in the day when we did the HR1 2017, when we passed through the original Trump tax cuts, there were obviously issues and things that we needed to revisit there. And I'm sure that will be the same thing with the big, beautiful bill or middle class or working families tax cuts bill or whatever we call it today. We will have to work through those things in the future. And, even thinking back to the passage of the ACA, I mean, we had the health insurance tax, the medical device tax, we had the Cadillac tax, we had multiple parts of that bill that, we were ultimately able to get bipartisan consensus and coalition to fix parts of, signature landmark legislation that needed to be fixed because they were having detrimental impacts on the American patient today. So, we were very, very excited to work with this, just given the confluence of innovation that's occurring in both North Carolina and in Pennsylvania. And, my boss by trade prior to coming to Congress was a practicing dermatologist and internist in rural Pennsylvania in a small practice. But even prior to that, when he was at Hopkins, he was someone who has worked on an NIH grant. He does kind of have that perspective of research and what goes into this, and that's one of the things that just himself as being an advocate for the rare disease community really led him to kind of rolling up the sleeves and let's actually try to find some solutions to the problems that are being presented by and it's not just the IRA. I mean, there's a lot more that can be done to incentivize small biotech, to incentivize the startups, to incentivize the folks who are really coming up with the next thing that is going to be curative and transform the practice of medicine. He kind of always gives the example of Keytruda, where he was a derm, even going back 5, 6, 7 years ago, a metastatic melanoma diagnosis often meant death in short order. And through pharmaceutical advancements and through kind of the new set of biologics, all of which started in orphan indications, we've been able to see patient outcomes change from him having to write a hospice referral in 6 months to people going on to living 10, 15, 20 years of their lives with their families after, a difficult diagnosis like that. So, we're thrilled to be working together on this. And, I have all of the optimism in the world that as we continue to build out our co-sponsorship roster, as we continue to look at, what more can be done from a biotech innovation space, I think we're very hopeful to get this over the finish line this Congress as well. And I'll turn it back.
Thanks, Matt. That was really great. Something that just stuck out to me with what you said, you mentioned there just being so many places to fail in the pathway of developing any drug, really, whether it be clinical trials or with the FDA approval process. At the end of the day, what the Mini Act is really about is getting effective treatments to patients. But I think, we have to bear in mind the risks that go along with getting those, markets developed and researched and ultimately to market. So I think that was a really good point. You brought up a number of good points. Hopefully we'll have some questions on those later. But now I want to turn it over to Hilly Page. Hilly is the Chief Innovation Officer at the Family Heart Foundation.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Chris. And thanks to Jonathan and Matt for their great work on this initiative. And, before I jump into my slides, I really want to just thank Mandy and recognize Mended Hearts for their leadership on the Mini Act. And it's not just on this act. So Mended Hearts has been engaged on the issue of access to care for a long time now. We just passed the 10-year anniversary of the introduction of two therapies, Repatha and Praluent, that were going to revolutionize the treatment of LDL cholesterol in people with FH and ASCVD. And unfortunately, the first few years of their introduction were marked by rejection rates from payers of 70, 80, 90%. And Mended Hearts was one of the organizations that was really in the vanguard of the fight to make sure that appropriate patients had access. And so their work on Mini is not new. That really represents a long-standing tradition of focus on this. So I'm really thrilled to be able to, on the next slide, just represent the Family Heart Foundation and talk a little bit about why this matters so much to our community. So just a word about the Family Heart Foundation. We're a nonprofit patient advocacy organization that was founded in 2011. The mission of the organization is to save generations of families from heart disease through timely identification and improved care of the two most common inherited cholesterol disorders. Now, that's familial hypercholesterolemia, which affects about 1 to 2 million Americans. And in fact, today is FH Awareness Day. So I'll wish everybody a happy FH Awareness Day. And elevated lipoprotein(a), which is far from rare. It actually affects 60 million Americans. We focus on research, advocacy, and education to support both of these communities and to empower families to navigate their own health. If you go to the next slide, so I'm going to focus really my comments on lipoprotein(a) and why this matters. So as I say, 60 million Americans have a high level. Lp(a) is a strong independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. If you have a high level, it increases your risk of a heart attack, stroke, heart failure, peripheral arterial disease, aortic stenosis, a lot of different bad things. And when I say independent, it's independent of your other cardiovascular disease risk factors. So independent of blood pressure, smoking, diabetes, your cholesterol. So very strong, newly identified risk factor for cardiovascular disease. On the next slide, you'll see the prevalence really depends on your ancestry in some ways. So in general, the prevalence is about 20% of the population. But people of African descent have about a 30% prevalence of having a high level of Lp(a). People of South Asian ancestry have about a 25% prevalence of high Lp(a), and women also have a higher level than men. Around the world, it's about 1.4 billion people have a level that is would be considered high, and in the US, that's about 60 million Americans. On the next slide, this shows the relationship between your level of lipoprotein(a) and your risk of cardiovascular disease. So on the x-axis, it shows the level of Lp(a), and on the y-axis, it is the rate of cardiovascular disease. And you can see it really is what they call a continuous variable. So the higher the Lp(a), the higher your risk, not only of a first cardiovascular event, but also if you already have cardiovascular disease, a subsequent cardiovascular event. So very powerful risk factor, independent. The higher the level, the higher the risk. And on the last slide, the reason this is so important is that there are 5 different therapies that are in development right now for treating high levels of Lp(a). There's nothing currently available that's would be effective for lowering high levels of Lp(a). And 4 of the 5 therapies are actually GTTs, or genetically targeted technologies. And so this is really, it strikes to the core of this issue and this matter. And in fact, it's not just rare disease. Cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer of Americans, and high levels of Lp(a) are a very powerful risk factor. So we have so many people in our community that the one risk factor they have is a high level of Lp(a) and a positive family history. And so folks are really concerned about the development of these agents. And several of the speakers have talked about just the cost of development. So the top 4 drugs that are listed here are all right now involved in large cardiovascular outcome trials to see whether or not only do they lower Lp(a), but also do they reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. The average cost for each one of those cardiovascular trials is about $1.5 billion. So very significant investments, because these are all 10, 15, 20,000 patient studies. And what's amazing about these therapies is that they lower Lp(a) on average 80, 85, 90, in some cases 95%. So they are incredibly effective, and right now are being tested. And so it's drugs like these that are not only for cardiovascular disease, or a whole host in development for rare diseases and other things that are impacted by this act. And so that's why the Maintaining Investment in New Innovation Act is so important to the Family Heart Foundation and to our community. And so, Chris, I'll turn it back to you, but that's just kind of a little perspective on why this matters. And these are pictures of many of our folks in our community that have high Lp(a). It's, as you can see, it's a lot of individuals and a lot of folks that aren't necessarily old, but they are really, we've got it strikes across every age group.
Oh, thanks, Haley. That was great. That last slide, I think, was incredibly powerful, just really emphasizing how few of these types of treatments currently exist. And, if we don't have the Mini Act in place, not only is it impactful for those drugs currently under development, but we want that research and that development to continue into the future. That's one of the most important things, right? And that's really what is at the crux of the Mini Act. So, I think we're going to move to a Q&A portion. I don't know if we've been getting any in the chat, but I will assert some moderator privileges and ask a first question. This will be for Jonathan and Matt. You both touched on this a bit, but I'm just wondering if you want to speak any more to maybe the process and timing of the Mini Act. Matt, you mentioned Orphan Cures getting into OBBBA, which was fantastic. Just wondering if you guys are seeing any legislative vehicle or maybe moving this standalone or whatever the case may be. How do you see this moving down the field?
Matt, if you want to go first.
Yeah, yes, I'm happy to field that one. Yeah. Just having gone through the reconciliation process with Cures, that is not the most fun or best way to legislate, just given the bird rule and just kind of the myriad of obstacles that you kind of face when you're assembling one of these massive, multi-pronged, trillion-dollar reshuffling of the decks on spending and tax policy and a whole bunch of other things. Like, it can make things very challenging, which I'm sure if you guys were watching it closely, we passed it out of the House. It got stripped from the original 2 or 3 drafts released by the Senate. We ultimately got it back in. Then it got stripped because of bird challenges. Ultimately got back in. It was like what? It was a weekend going into the July 4th holiday. Was just spending most of the time on the phone with lawyers and people in the parliamentarian's office and trying to figure that stuff out, just because of the I don't want to get sidetracked here and talk bird rule I could for an hour, but it is, yeah, like my preference would be to move it through regular order. Just given how this Congress has been going, obviously I think it would make the most sense to try and piece this into a larger package, just because we are not doing a phenomenal job these days of blocking and tackling and passing small things by themselves anymore. So, what that's going to require is going to get some sort of, hearing process, markup process at the Energy and Commerce Committee, which, can be challenging. I think we got we started some of that process 2 years ago on Rare Disease Day when we had Orphan Cures and Mini Act included in a hearing, which was, a positive step. There are some concerns, I think, kind of from, the minority on touching the IRA, some politics around that I think, to Jonathan's point, the further we get away from the passage of IRA, the better that gets for us. And then we got to get to the markup space. And, just given the fact that the drug negotiation portion of the IRA is considered budgetarily to be a saver for the government, there will be an associated cost with passing the Mini Act. Depending on the day of the week when you talk to our budget bean counters, it's anywhere between 100 million and 450. But relatively speaking, in healthcare, that actually is a pretty small cost. So I think it'll take the right assembling of mix of politics and what vehicle makes sense. But we are now well beyond the original 5-year expiration of a lot of the 21st Century Cures programs. We would love to see those come back into play and kind of re-up and using the lessons that we've gotten, be able to kind of improve upon that. And I think a change in that context in this nature makes a lot of sense. If we are talking about innovation in drug pricing in a larger scale thing, I think there are a lot of things that we can do in terms of strengthening the biosimilar pathway, strengthening some other things too, where if we are able to create savings in the drug pricing space, we should be able to use that to invest in the drug development space. So I would kind of aim for something like that as a way where we're trying to assemble. I kind of joke about the mythical healthcare package that we're always working on here in Congress, but that kind of conversation is where I think we need to be targeting and really working the process there.
Yeah. That makes
Just a
sense.
quick-
And
go
go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick point, jumping on what Matt had said and echoing everything he said. There's obviously some opposition. The minority of the Energy Commerce Committee, that's publicly known, but the intensity of the opposition relative to some of the other, especially the broader IRA related measures, which again we're supportive of, but compared to that, and also when talking about cost, I mean, the estimated cost of the EPIC Act, which again we're supporting, but the Mini Act is about relative to if you were to move the timeline back for all small molecules, you're talking about 80 to 90 times less cost. So it's just a huge gulf there, and very far less cost overall.
And Chris, I just had a question. So one thing that'd be really helpful for our community, we'll certainly share this webinar with our community, and we have a very engaged group, and I'm sure Men at Hearts is the same way. But if somebody watches this and says, this is really interesting, I really want to engage on this issue, what would you suggest somebody do as kind of a next step, other than watching this and feeling concerned about it? What can folks do to move the needle?
I guess my first step, I mean, if you want to get involved, I mean, it is the easiest way if if you're a staffer and you're interested in the idea and want to try and get your boss to jump on legislation, is to hear from constituents. Go reach out, ask for a phone call, ask for a meeting, see if the members back in district, if you'd like to see if you're able to set something up there and get in front of them. And if you're not able to, don't get discouraged, reach out directly to staff. Send a letter, call in, and kind of get to talk to the person that is the Matt or the Jonathan of that office, and just walk them through, if you're able to get the time, of here's the impact on myself, my family, here's why we think this is a good idea, and would love a follow back on, what you guys think and if you'd be willing to sign on. And I mean, there is a very strong element of common sense to this bill that really makes those conversations easy. And to the extent that you can personalize it and show the impact back on patients and constituents in their district, I think that is really beneficial and really helps us as that number keeps growing. It
Yeah.
makes our jobs a lot easier from a leverage standpoint of you can't ignore this idea because it does have broad support.
That's
And-
helpful, Matt. So it doesn't matter Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter the state. It really is kind of, if you can talk to somebody, talk to them.
Yeah, and another key point is, having that broader outreach is especially helpful because one of the primary, talking points against anything IRA reform related can often be, the knee-jerk reaction could be, well, it's a giveaway to the pharmaceutical industry, to big pharma. So given the involvement of some of these, patient groups and hearing from those who directly benefit from the bill and making that case, I think is important for those offices that are skeptical to get that other perspective that that's not, this is about helping patients, and the involvement of so many of the patient advocacy groups is evidence of that, and hearing those personal stories is very impactful.
That's great. Thank you.
Karen, do we have any questions from the audience?
We do. We have a couple. They're more about needing additional information. So the first one is, please provide a list of the cardiac specific GTT at risk. Is there a list that we can get our hands on and get to people?
We can look into that. I think it's hard to say if there are specific GTTs at risk right now. I think what we've all kind of been talking about here is, there's a number of GTTs that are currently in research and development. Haley mentioned several that are in the clinical trial phase right now. What we ultimately want to happen, right, is, have those GTTs be approved, and then make sure they have the appropriate, timeline once they are approved to recoup those. And then going forward from there, we want the mini act to be approved. So these companies, these mid-sized companies that Jonathan was talking about, continue to make those investments and do that research to bring more therapies online. So I think it's maybe difficult to determine if there are any under threat currently. I think that's maybe what GTTs would be under threat in the future if we don't pass mini act. And anybody else can please hold me honest to that answer.
I think that's very true, Chris. So the development timelines in pharma are very long. They're 10 plus years. And so the best analogy is if you rewound the clock 5 years ago, people weren't talking about Lp(a) related therapies. And so if at that time you were able to make investments in certain things that had a longer period of protection as opposed to a shorter period, those are the sorts of decisions that are being made for things that are in preclinical and phase 1. And so, the Lp(a) therapies are well advanced, but it's the next therapies that are coming in the next 5 to 10 years that are targeting, whether it's a rare condition, or highly prevalent conditions. Those are the sorts of decisions that are being made. And the other great analogy is if you were going to open up a store and sell 2 different things, and in one item you had 7 years of protection, and then in 7 years somebody was going to tell you what you could charge for it, and the other item was you had protection for 11 years. Economics are pretty simple that way in terms of what you would actually prioritize for what you were going to invest in.
And that 7 to 11 year window is the most, that's the highest yield for especially these companies that are just trying to break even. We're not talking about, with GTTs, we're not generally talking about Pfizer, Merck, or some of the bigger names. We're talking about companies that are barely able to stay afloat, and that they're not going to be able to make those investments if there's not certainty and an ability that they know they're going to have that guaranteed window of time.
Yep.
Okay, thank you for that. A couple other questions that in my mine seem to be sort of related. We have somebody asking for a document that includes talking points for discussion with legislatures. The second one is kind of similar, also asking if Mended Hearts is able to provide a few letter writing templates for advocates to send into congressional members for ease of use, because it's a complicated topic and a template would be super helpful.
Yep. That's definitely something we can work on.
Okay. All right. And then is GTT the same as gene therapy? Are they one and the same?
Ooh, do we have a
Anyone?
doctor online who can answer that question?
Any-
I mean, you know, I'll take a stab at that. My
Sure.
understanding is no, but they're related. I think GTTs are a type of gene therapy, but gene therapy in and of itself can encompass some broader types of treatment.
Okay. Are there any particular diseases or conditions that benefit more than others from this technology?
Ooh, you guys are throwing some hardballs at us.
Medical question.
Yeah,
It's a
Go ahead.
really wide spectrum, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
I think both Jonathan and Matt mentioned rare diseases, and
Yep.
I know the rare disease community is very engaged on this. And of course, I speak for and represent the cardiovascular community, which affects a huge number of individuals. And so whether it's a siRNA therapy or an antisense therapy, they both fall under this GTT category. They're in development for a whole host of different conditions, big, small, but they're incredibly innovative. And I think, as you pointed out, Chris, I mean, some of the advantages is just the dosing. I mean, some of the siRNA therapies that are in development for high Lp(a) could be dosed every 6 months, potentially once a year kind of a therapy. And so it's really for folks that oftentimes are used to taking a pill every day, it makes it a lot easier from just from an adherence standpoint.
And for those conditions where there's a genetic mutation, the GTTs can be really precision targeted. If there's, for instance, one defective gene, they can target that as opposed to just managing symptoms. They can get to the root cause of the disease and really make exponentially a bigger difference than just a treatment that's designed to manage the care and prolong, can really improve quality of life big time.
Yeah, and the other kind of element of this too is just in the small molecule space with GTTs, you know, the flip side of the biologics too, like you're not able to penetrate the blood-brain barrier. So a lot of these are also focused at, kind of, brain disorders that we all know. When we talk about Parkinson's, when we talk about Alzheimer's, when we talk about a bunch of other disease states that, cannot be treated unless by small molecule. This is another tool in the tool belt of things that can be brought that, can truly be curative for some of the, most devastating things that we see, from, big populations like Parkinson's all the way down to, like Huntington's disease, which is, a genetic thing as well. So, yeah.
Couple more questions. Wondering if CRISPRs in the trial space now, potentially, are they a part of GTT? CRISPR research, CRISPR studies?
My understanding is that's specifically gene therapy. Literally changing the genetic makeup of an individual. So not necessarily GTT, no. And anybody, please correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, I'll back you up. Yeah, that is my
Good.
understanding.
I just needed one person to say, "Hey, yeah, that sounds right."
My understanding as well. Yes, like we're
right.
with the GT space, you're targeting something that's created by a genetic misprint or whatever. Whereas gene therapy or CRISPR technology is you are actually going in and rewriting
Right.
that person's genome, and like the treatment is much more intensive and different when you're actually administering like a true in that concept of a gene therapy, wherein it's almost like an organ transplant where you have to go in, kill the immune system, you need to be immunosuppressed, and then they can deliver the treatment. And then you also need like bone marrow transplants, a whole bunch of other things that go into, at least that's how the sickle cell treatment has been explained to me, which falls into that category. It is very intrusive, whereas GTTs are more small molecule, once or twice a month, maybe once a quarter type interventions in
Right.
pill form rather than that.
Our final question actually kind of touches on that, Matt. And Hilly, you just spoke to this as well, but how do GTTs help with medication adherence? What is the benefit to patients taking these therapies instead of oral medications? And I think both of y'all just touched on that. If you want to recap it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Hilly, please.
Oh, sure. So it's a great question. And I think the adherence, so some of the, especially the siRNA therapies, but even the antisense therapies, which again are both covered under the genetically targeted technologies, they can be dosed monthly, they can be dosed every 6 months, in some cases up to once a year. And so anytime we're stuck in the cardiovascular space with a lot of oral medications that you have to take every day, and trying to get people to remember a daily therapy is a real challenge, especially for asymptomatic conditions. And many of these, in some cases on the cardiovascular side, are asymptomatic. And so something that allows for dosing once a month or once every 6 months or once a year has significant advantages.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
speaking from my boss's experience as a doctor, he'll always say, the best treatment course is the one that a patient will actually follow. And, the one that requires the fewest amount of interventions and adherence points is obviously always preferable.
Yeah, makes sense. So Chris, that's all I have for Q&A.
Great.
That is everyone. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you, all three of you. This has been fantastic. Jonathan, Matt, Hilly, appreciate the perspectives that y'all bring for this. You have the two congressional offices leading this effort here and a fantastic patient advocacy organization. We're gonna, as Mended Hearts, we're gonna try to continue the drumbeat and help advocate for this and help get it across the finish line. So, Matt, Jonathan, again, I'll just say appreciate what you guys are doing. Thank you for joining and providing your boss's perspectives. It's great what they're doing for the patient groups out there. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.